This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. Today's episode is part 2 of our conversation with literary scholar Heather Clark, who shares some surprising discoveries about writing fiction after decades of academic and nonfiction writing. She also talks about why it's actually helpful to move between genres. Enjoy. I know that you've got a novel coming out soon, and can't help but ask how you went from Plath to then writing fiction on your own.
So I suspect many listeners also have a secret novel in their drawer, right? Especially if they're English professors. We're all secret novelists, probably, or many of us are. So yes, I have a novel coming out in June. It's called The Scrapbook. It's a love story and a war story that moves between the 1990s and the 1940s. It's about two young lovers, and Anna is an American and Christoph's a German, and their grandfathers who fought on opposite sides during World War II. So most of the novel is set in Germany and told by Anna, but some chapters follow their grandfathers as they fight in Bavaria and Belarus. I started this novel a long time ago. I started it in the 1990s. And then I put it aside because life got busy. I had to get tenure. I was writing academic monographs. I was writing academic articles. I was teaching 4 classes a semester at Marlborough College. I had 2 children. I was commuting from Brooklyn to Vermont. I mean, it was insane. It was completely insane. And I just didn't have the bandwidth or time really to write fiction or poetry anymore. And I'd written a ton of it in graduate school. And so I kind of mourned that, but I thought, well, this is life. You can't, you just got to put that aside. You have other things to do. And then while I was writing Red Comet, in sort of the middle of that, my grandfather passed away at the age of 91. And I knew he'd been a GI in World War II and that he had been part of a unit that helped liberate Dachau. But I didn't know much more than that because he almost never spoke about the war. And then after his funeral, my grandmother brought his wartime scrapbook down from the attic where it had been sitting for 50 years and put it on the dining room table. And I remember I was alone in the room, which was odd because I come from a big family, but somehow there was nobody in the dining room at that moment. And I started looking through the scrapbook and I saw these photos from Dachau. And it was very obvious to me that it had been the day it was liberated or the next day. And it was horrific. And as you can imagine, these photos haunted me. And so I was in the middle of writing Red Comet, and all of a sudden I have this personal connection to the war and the Holocaust that I didn't really know about before. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I started reading books about the war, and I considered writing a nonfiction book, but I didn't have enough information really about what my grandfather had been through. And, I'm not a historian as much as I pretend that I am or wish that I am. And then I just thought, well, maybe I'll make it up. And I had started this other book about Germany years ago, and I just sort of thought, oh, I'll put these 2 plots together and see what happens. And I discovered that it was quite liberating to make things up after writing an 1,100-page biography of Sylvia Plath. I didn't start writing it or finishing it, I suppose I should say, until Red Comet was published. And also the Red Comet, the reception of it gave me, I think, a little bit more confidence just to experiment and kind of see where I didn't tell anybody I was writing it. It was a complete secret, except maybe my husband. My husband knew, but nobody else. And then when it was done, I gave it to my agent and said, what do you think? And so I I guess I want to encourage people because again, I think a lot of us English professors, we go into this because we love literature and we love to write and sometimes I think we can become intimidated by the writers that we study, right? So much. I mean, I used to write so much poetry and I don't anymore, I think, because I was like, oh, Sylvia Plath could never. I think this was terrible. And I think I faked myself out.
Mhm.
Um, and but I really enjoyed making that change and just allowing myself to kind of spread my wings a little bit and honestly spending 10 years writing biography, it was a lot, right? I footnote every other sentence in that book. I think there are about 300 pages of notes because I wanted to be very, very careful. So making things up is is liberating after that. And I think that moving between fiction and nonfiction, I mean, not many people do it. I don't know why. I think people start to think that oh, I got to stay in my lane. This is what I am. I'm a nonfiction writer. And I thought that too for a long time. But, I'd had this long phase when I was younger where I wrote a ton of fiction and I published some of it. And I thought, well, I kind of want to finish what I started back then. But I think, if you can kind of, again, give yourself permission to switch it up a little bit, change genres, see what happens. And I think it's good for the writing. I think it keeps you a little bit more nimble. When I get bored of writing the nonfiction, I'll go to the fiction and vice versa. And it really helps with burnout. So, and I could see that poetry would be similar, right? Going from nonfiction to poetry or fiction to poetry. But yeah, this is something that I hadn't really done before, switching between genres, and I'm really enjoying it quite a bit.
I think some of us who are currently in the nonfiction lane think that to be in the fiction lane, you've got to be really immersed or have the space that maybe it's difficult to take time away. That with especially a novel, um, you want to be pretty regular with it so that you kind of keep that whole fictional universe with you. Did you find that to be the case? The process of writing it, how was it different or the same as your other writing had been?
I found that it was the opposite of that. And I was surprised because I've heard other people say that as well. Um, for me, it's the nonfiction that requires total immersion. I don't even bother unless I've got a solid 3 hour chunk. I don't even it's like not even worth it to sit at my desk unless I can sit and write for at least 2 hours, right? At least. And I I have to have those long blocks of time to write biography because I'm just working with so many different sources and the letters and keeping track of everything in my mind and footnoting and I don't know. I can't do that unless I'm completely in a quiet space, concentrated. Fiction, I can write on the train, I can write in between errands. And again, maybe it's because of this sense of like I'm free.
Mm-hmm.
I get to make things up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real I don't know, I almost feel like I'm getting away with something. Like, is this allowed? I can do this, Like, and I'm not saying I make up historical facts or anything like that. I mean, I have probably read like 200 books about World War II and the Holocaust over the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I really tried to do my homework, even though there are only 3 chapters in the book set in the 1940s. I did a ton of reading about that time in Germany and Belarus. So yeah, I qualify making things up, but it is yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. Probably impossible for you to answer in it, but if someone were to ask you which kind of writing is more fun, how would you answer them?
Ah, I I truly enjoy both for different reasons. And when I was writing the scrapbook, not last year, I think it was the year before, uh, whenever I would reach an impasse, I would just start working on this Boston group biography. And I sort of wrote them at the same time. Like the Boston book is about done. It's a little over 700 pages. This was supposed to be the short book, so we'll see how that
Hmm.
goes. But so I don't know how they've kind of eh, influenced each other, but it was like a respite to go when one thing wasn't working out and I was just getting frustrated with myself. I would just go to the other project, and somehow that would help. It would just get me out of that psychic space. It would help me stop beating myself up. Like, why isn't this working? Why can't you do this? Why can't you figure this out? And just taking time away from that and immersing yourself in a different world. Just help me come back. So they're both fun in different ways. I think it's much more nerve-wracking for me to release a novel. Um, and sometimes I'm like, why did I do this? I could have just released this Boston Group bio next. That's
Hmm.
what everyone expects of me. They want another Plath book, a Sexton book, and I'm also working on a biography of Anne Sexton too at the same time. So I know that's sort of if I had just stayed in my lane, I could have skipped this novel and done that. But I just, these photos haunted me so much, and I felt like, I feel like the war is fading from people's memories, and my grandfather played this very small part and took these photographs and has this documentary evidence of what happened. And we're living in a time of increasing Holocaust denial. And I just sort of wanted to record that. Like, this happened, and I have this family connection to it. I wanted to record his story, I think, in this very small way. And, in the novel, at one point, one of the characters says, we're the last ones who will remember the stories of our grandparents. And I think about that a lot, that the third generation, right? What happens when we're gone. And so that was part of my reason to do it, was just to kind of get it down. Like that my grandfather had been at Dachau and he had seen these things and he had taken these pictures, and this all happened. And so um yeah, I suppose that kind of drove me. But if I'd had any sense at all, I just wouldn't have I would have just skipped it.
Is that because there's something that feels more personal or you about the novel? It's something you created as opposed to saying, "Oh, well, this is Sylvia Plath that I'm putting out into the world." So I'm not as self-conscious maybe about that.
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, this feels completely different. Much scarier. Because there's always that critical distance, right? When you're writing a biography or an academic monograph. Um, and I always preferred to speak through the archive. And with the novel, I wasn't necessarily speaking through the archive anymore, even though I was using my grandfather's scrapbook and the title is the scrapbook. And I was kind of using these sort of biographical methods. I was using my own biographical skills to do historical research to make my characters. And I should mention that those of us who are trained to write nonfiction, and whether it's academic, biography, whatever it is, those skills transferred very easily, I thought, to writing historical fiction. Almost shockingly so. Like I was like, whoa, why didn't I do this before? Uh, you have the skills,
Hmm.
right, to research all of this and to find the fun stories and kind of maybe create this world. Um, but yes, it feels much more personal and yeah, scarier.
On that topic of finding the stories, I was wondering when I read Red Comet, it was so fun to hear Sylvia Plath's words and voice come through your biography. Was it difficult, or how did you figure out when you were going to actually rely on quotation and when, to paraphrase, we've spoken to other academics who've gone trade, and some of them have mentioned how they learned they needed to put it into their own voice, that in academic articles we're used to having all these quotations and footnotes, but to create this non-fiction narrative voice, they couldn't do that maybe as much as they were used to. What was it like for you?
I was lucky in that I I I was given full permission to quote Sylvia Plath, and probably many of your listeners know the fraught history of Plath biography. For years, Ted Hughes's sister kind of managed the estate because Sylvia Plath died intestate, and Ted Hughes um, got her copyright. So she managed it all, and she did not like Sylvia Plath, and she did not like feminist scholars, and so it was a mess. That was, I think, that's part of the reason it was very hard to even write a good biography of Plath during that time. When Olwen Hughes died, Frida took over, and it's just been much easier to um, to quote. And so I wanted to take advantage of that I was the first biographer who was sort of completely given free rein. And I wanted her to come across in her own voice as much as possible. So I quote a lot. I mean, I quote a lot in that book. And there's a reason for that. I almost wanted her to be able to tell her own story in her own words. And to me, that story was about how she became a writer. That was the story that I thought she told most often about herself or even wanted to tell about herself in her diaries, in her letters. That's that was her story. How do I become a writer? I mean, the the depression and the suicide and the mental illness, it's all there, believe me. I mean, it's all in the background, but this was the story that I think this was what she cared the most about. And so that's what I ran with, and I tried to get her to tell that story in her own words. And so that's then a matter of choosing what you think are the most interesting quotes. And that's hard too, because for every quote that's in there, I dispensed with, 10 others that I had considered using. So that's painstaking, and it takes a lot of time. It's almost like making a collage a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's just the way I write. I admire nonfiction writers who don't do that, right? Who don't quote a lot and use their own voice, and that can work brilliantly as well. It just happens to be that I'm better at doing the research, sitting in the archives, finding the quotes and stringing them all together in that way. So so yeah,
Mm.
and sometimes I think, well, what's the point of biography? Couldn't somebody just read her journals, read her letters? I mean, wouldn't somebody have as good an understanding of her if they did that as like if they read my biography? So I had to justify it to myself a lot because I would have those voices of doubt in my head, um, especially because so much had been published by Plath by then, right? All of her collected letters were published in 2018. All of her, well, most of her journals are out, that kind of thing. So yeah, you're always sort of justifying it, like, well, what are you contributing to um, this story, and why should someone sit down and read your book and not Sylvia Plath's letters? Like, so just always being aware of that and what you owe to the reader, right? And so there was this sense of mission that I had to kind of reframe her as the professional writer first, as Hermione Lee said, and in her own words as much as I could.
Yeah, it works really, really beautifully. There's two questions that we ask all guests, and one is, what is something you wish you had known about writing or publishing earlier in your career?
I don't know if it's anything I wish I knew about writing earlier. I love to write and I get, depressed if I don't write. So I always have been writing any chance I get. And but one thing I wish I had known, I wish I had given myself a little bit of media training
Hmm.
before Red Comet came out. And I don't know if this answers your question. Although I think this would maybe be good advice for any academic who wants to switch to trade or, who writes a trade book. I think because I had released two academic monographs with Oxford University Press previously, one about Northern Irish poetry and the second one about Plath and Hughes's mutual poetic relationship. And, these were $100 books that were published there were 700 copies or something like that. And pub day came and that was it. I had, you're just happy your book's out there. I didn't do a thing. Yeah, I read some nice academic reviews and that was that. So I had absolutely no idea what was coming when Red Comet came out. I mean, I was flying blind. Did not really understand what I was going to be asked to do in terms of publicity. And okay, there was a lot with that book and it exceeded my expectations and it was a dream come true and all of that. Um, but I had no clue how to kind of deal with any of it. And I don't think I had allowed myself to think, oh, what if this book breaks out? Like I just didn't even go there. I just thought, oh, it'll be like one of my Oxford University Press books that gets published and
Hmm.
there'll be a couple of reviews and you call it a day. And I've done like 80 events on Sylvia Plath since then or something like that. So I wish I had sort of allowed myself to think, well, no, what if this book does well? Like what am I going to say about it? What are the important points? And it just caught me by such surprise.
Hmm.
So I guess that would be some advice if you are making that trade from academic. Sorry, if you are making that switch from academic to trade, just just do that for yourself. Give yourself that the luxury of imagining your book is going to do really well and how you would promote it and publicize it and all of that. So
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, as someone who watched a bunch of your great interviews that were, because I think this was sort of pandemic time, so there were a bunch of wonderful Zoom interviews with you. Had that sort of like delighted to be invited to be on this program, sort of didn't know this was going to happen, but, and it was very refreshing. And just, I mean, I guess now that you say it, I'm like, oh, I guess that maybe that is a result of not having expected this or practiced for it. But it was very appealing to listen to someone who just seemed like great to be here and wasn't expecting this sort of attitude.
Oh yeah. No, I was not. Well, when you're an academic, you just sort of toil in obscurity, right?
Mhm, right.
You you publish these books and hope maybe 20 people read them and so that's what I was working with.
Hmm.
And okay, yeah, I knew it was going to be a little bit bigger, but I just yeah, it caught me completely by surprise.
I know some of our listeners, are thinking, or maybe they're in a situation where they're going to be leaving academia or thinking about that. It worked out very well for you, it seems. But I'm wondering about how that was going away from maybe the structure of an academic position to, it sounds like really full time writing now. And that seems wonderful. How is it?
Yeah, it's been a very rocky road. So I taught full time at Marlborough College for about 10 years, and that's a teaching intensive college. It closed. Um, I was teaching 4 classes a semester, like 10 tutorials a semester, and I just had no time to write. The only time I had to write was during the summer and sabbaticals, and I really wanted to write. And so I had tried to get academic jobs, believe me, at research intensive institutions, and there were no takers. I mean, I've probably applied for over 100 academic jobs in my lifetime, and some very recently. um, and it just seemed like I, this is impossible. Like, I'll just never get another job. So I tried to kind of write my way out. And that was part of the reason for writing the Plath biography. Um, and it was a gamble in a way, and it worked. Um, and at that point, I gave up tenure. I just thought, I'm ready to do this. I was commuting from Brooklyn. I had two children. I mean, but I couldn't find anything else. And so I decided I was going to jump ship and make a career move. And my husband supported me with that. And with the advance, I was able to contribute to the household as well. But there was some sadness too in leaving academia, because I'd worked really hard, right, for that. I published two monographs, and those took me a long time to write. And so there was always this sort of grief. And then I was offered a position kind of out of the blue at the University of Huddersfield in England. And I was there for the past 5 years, and I was a full professor there of contemporary poetry. But again, I was flying across the Atlantic, right? And it was really hard. And again, I sort of tried to find other things, and I just think it's ridiculously hard to get an academic job. I mean, I was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and like I can barely get an interview, you know? So I think I've just made my peace now with like I don't know. It is so incredibly difficult to get a job. And I never ever thought that I would have an easier time supporting myself through my creative writing
Yeah.
than than an academic position. So so everything has kind of turned for me. Like when I was 18 years old, wanting to get an MFA, thinking, oh, but I won't be able to support myself. Well, actually, it was the academic job market that dried up. My college closed a couple of years after I left. That was the other thing. I saw the writing on the wall. So it was a little bit easier to jump ship, knowing it was about, it wasn't a bad place. But and then, the department at the University of Huddersfield, it's budget cuts, and it's half of what it was a couple of years ago. So this is happening everywhere. And yeah, it turns out that actually the creative writing is what's paying the bills for me, and not an academic job. And I've tried, believe me, I've tried. So I just never would have foreseen that when I was 18 and kind of trying to make these decisions.
Yeah, it's amazing. The other question that we've been asking guests is if there's a writing practice or habit that works for you.
3 pages a day. Yeah, when I have a day to write. When I say a day to write, that's like 5 hours of uninterrupted time, 6 if you're really lucky, kind of after the school bus leaves and before the kids get home, that kind of thing. Yeah, I just force myself 3 pages a day, and the pages add up quickly, and they don't have to be good. You can go back, but there's a real sense of accomplishment, and 7 times out of 10 you write more than 3 pages in that day. But if you just have it in your mind that I'm not going to leave this desk until I've written 3 pages, and that it's just this very simple simple rule, but it worked for me, and I have more time now because I write full time. But even when I didn't, that would help in the summers and sabbaticals and all of that.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has been really interesting and fun, and I'm very excited to share it. And congratulations. I'm looking forward to the novel that's coming out soon.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.